G'day guys. Well, with restrictions starting to ease and winter only a few months away, it's not going to be long now before we're pulling our vans out of storage and hitting the road on those adventures. So today we're going to be going over all the things that I do post-storage, or the pre-trip checks that I do on my van before hitting the road after the van's been sitting stationary for a little while. So we're going to go over everything from front to back, exterior, interior, and just how to check all the appliances, so you guys have a nice, safe and working van before you head off on those next adventures. So stay tuned and let's get straight into it. Okay, so just a quick disclaimer before we start today's video, and that is that I'm towing a 2018 Jayco Journey Outback 17.58-3, which, as you can probably tell, is a bunk van and also a pop top. So by no means is this video an exhaustive list of things that you should check before you go on your trips, and make sure that you're completely aware of all the appliances and features and safety items on your van when doing these checks. So just keep in mind, not all of these items that we're going to have today are just annual or post-storage checks. A lot of them are going to be checks that you're going to be doing every time you go out on a trip. So without further ado, let's get straight into what we need to check. So starting front to back, the first thing you're going to want to check on your van, once you haven't used it for a while, is the hitch and the mechanism and everything in relation to it here. So there's a little bit going on, so let's break it down. First of all, depending on the type of coupling you have, you want to make sure that it's functioning correctly and working as it should. So for example here, I've got a tread hitch, which is a semi-articulating hitch. So I want to make sure that this articulates fully all the way around, and also this block moves up and down nice and freely as well. And make sure there's no damage to the pinhole in here and everything looks as it should. Moving onto the body of the hitch, there's 4 bolts that hold this whole hitch mechanism to the chassis itself. You want to make sure that these bolts are all in good condition and that they're all nice and tight. Now this particular tightening of the bolts, I would recommend just putting on a socket and making sure, you know, these things aren't going to move naturally. So just chuck a bolt on there, push them across and make sure they don't move. Doing that today, I did notice that these 2 front ones did move just a little bit, so now I'm confident that they are nice and tight. On here as well, you also have your brakes. So you can check both the brake handle and the locking mechanism, making sure it does lock into place. And when you push back, you can flip that back and move it across. Now doing that, you can also see the brake cable down underneath the chassis A-arm here. And you can see that that loosens off. And then when you pull the brake up, lock it into place. That is nice and taut. And later on, we'll go down how to check your brakes. Now also on the body of the hitch as well, there are 2 greasing points on the driver's side of the vehicle. So these 2 points here enable you to get a grease gun and chuck some grease down into the swivel points of this hitch. Now that's something that is definitely recommended. Not only is it going to make sure this lasts nice and long and has a nice smooth action, but it's also going to avoid getting water into this and corroding out the interior parts there. So we'll get a grease gun, we'll chuck some grease into there, and you just want to stick enough there so you might just see a little bit coming out of the edges, but not too much. You don't want to overpack it. Okay, so while we're at the front of the van, we also want to be checking things like your chains. Obviously, your chains should be in good order, and you want to pay a particular attention to the welds that connect your chains to the A-frame, making sure there's no damage to those welds and there's no hairline cracks that you can see. Now obviously, if you're not experienced in that area, it's going to be a little bit hard to see, but look, if you do see something obvious, you're going to notice it, and it's better you notice it here on the driveway than when it's too late out on the road. Making sure you have your rated shackles attached and they're all in good condition. Now also here, you're going to be wanting to check your electronic plugs. So on this particular Jayco, we run the 12-pin flat plug, and you want to be checking just the general condition of it, that the wiring is not damaged anywhere along this external covering here, and also the plug itself. So in there you'll see that there are 12 pins. You want to make sure there's no damage to any of those pins, and there's no indication of any burning or any overloading in that particular plug. Obviously when we get to hooking up a bit later on, we'll make sure that all the electrics are working and that this plug fits tightly and is secured. Now very important up here, a very important safety feature anyway, is your breakaway cable. So most vans are fitted, most new vans anyway, are fitted with breakaway cables, and what this does is attaches to a little black box here which connects to a unit inside the van. Now this here is activated in case of emergency when you attach this to the back of your car. In the rare instance that your van were to be detached from your vehicle, this will then pull out like that and activate the brakes on the van for a set amount of time to avoid the van rolling off without the vehicle attached. Now we want to make sure that that works properly. It does pull out fairly easily, not too easily, but fairly easily there. And then we'll go inside and show you how to check the actual unit itself. Okay, so we're just quickly inside the van at the moment, and this little box here, which you can see, is the Breakaway unit itself inside the van. So this particular one here houses a rechargeable battery, and it is charged off your vehicle while you're towing. This is completely independent to the battery in your van that powers all the rest of your appliances, and there's good reason for that as well. This here is a last resort and a fail safe for if that van comes attached, and you want to make sure it always has power and is working correctly. Now there's 4 LEDs on this particular unit as well, and there's a button in the center for testing the unit. So if we press that test button, you can see there that 2 of the green LEDs light up. So those 2 LEDs that light up, this bottom left one down here is saying that the test is operating correctly and is normal. And the top one up here is indicating that the battery is okay, meaning the state of charge is good. There are a couple of other LEDs here that would flash and make some noise if there was something wrong with the unit. Okay, so moving on from the hitch, the next thing I'm going to be checking are the gas bottles and all the gas fittings and connections. So first of all, you just want to be checking the general condition of your bottles, making sure there's no damage or obvious signs of wear and tear that need replacing or amending. So the next thing you want to check is the mounts. So obviously you've got your latches here for this particular type of gas bottle, and they are nice and tight and the bottle isn't moving anywhere. You also want to check the mount of those brackets as well. So in this particular case, there are 4 bolts, 2 on each side, that hold this gas bottle to the A-frame. So checking them, making sure they're all correct as well. You want to make sure all your dates are in spec, and making sure they're all good. Being a 2018 van, these gas bottles are all correct. Up to the fitting up here, making sure that both gas bottles open freely, and then when you press down your valves, they open and flow correctly. And obviously this one here is marked full, the other one's at half at the moment. When they're open and being checked as well, make sure you listen out for leaks. Make sure there's no obvious hissing sounds coming from the connections here, your connection here, or then again your frames, your T-pieces here as well. Okay, so moving along the chassis rail as well, you're going to be doing a general check, an assessment of the entire chassis rail all the way the length of the van. But in particular, pay close attention to where the A-frame meets up with those straight sections of chassis rails. As you can imagine, there's a lot of weight at a pivoting point on this section here where these welds connect, being between the axles of the van and the hitch of the van on the right. So making sure there's no obvious wear and tear signs of these particular welds here, not only on the outside of the van, but up inside on both sides as well. And again, in this particular case, we're not looking at anything there that should be worrying or concerning, so we're looking all good. Okay, so while you're here, also going to be checking at these levelers as well, making sure these handles pull out nice and easily, and that these bars lock into the various positions, as well as making sure that these bolts are in good condition and they do lower and heighten these levelers when they are pushed down. So I'll put a link in the description below is where you can buy one of these 19mm extended shanks for your drill piece. Makes it a lot easier to level up your van than using those winding handles. Okay, so let's move on to what I classify as probably one of the most important things to check on your van, regardless of whether it's coming out of storage or used it last week, and that is the tyres, wheels and suspension. So starting with the tyres, you want to be looking at the wear pattern, making sure that the tyres are wearing it nice and evenly. They're not scrubbing from side to side, wearing in the centre or wearing on the outsides. Obviously, as you use the van more, that will become more obvious, and depending on what kind of suspension system you have will depend on what that means for your van. So on this particular one, the Outback model, we're running the independent suspension by Jayco called the J-Tech. Now this particular system, if it were to be scrubbing out, it means that I've got a wheel alignment issue. Whereas if you had a leaf spring with a solid axle, you might potentially be looking at a bent axle if you are scrubbing on one of those sides or wearing unevenly. Now keep in mind as well, that being a dual axle, if these wheels are out of alignment, they're going to be pushing against each other and it's going to accelerate that wear and tear, and you're going to go through tyres very quickly. When I picked up this van, I made a point within the first 1,000 kilometres of owning it to make sure I got a wheel alignment done by an authorised caravan repairer to make sure that all 4 of my wheels were in good alignment, and so far they've proven to wear nice and evenly and nice and well. There's also with tyres something that's very easy to check, and it should be checked every time you use your van, is tyre pressure as well. Now pressure is going to vary depending on the terrain, but also the type of van you have and how heavy they are. So inside the van is a small placard, and that will tell you the recommended tyre pressure for your van, and obviously you can adjust that depending on the terrain, temperature and other factors. Moving down onto wheels. Now there's a couple of things you want to check with the wheels. The most important thing with the wheels is the tension of the wheel nuts. These things can come loose very easily, and once one starts to come loose, they all start to follow fairly quickly, and you end up losing a wheel if you don't check them. So just get your wheel spanner, check the tension of those nuts. They do not have to be over tight, but just enough to make sure they're nice and firm, nice and snug, and they're not going to come off when you're driving down the highway. So the other thing you need to look at in terms of your wheels are the wheel bearings themselves. So obviously they're behind this cap in here and nice and protected from dust and water ingress. Now to check these, you're going to have to lift up the tyres off the ground, and it's ideal is to grab the tyre by the 12 o'clock and the 6 o'clock positions and move it back and forth. There should be no play or no lateral movement in this wheel. If there is, it means that your bearings might need to be tightened, and depending on how long they've been like that or how exaggerated that movement is, depends on the wear, and it might even need replacing.
Okay, so here we are underneath the van. So it's definitely recommended at least once a year you get underneath your van and have a good thorough look at everything that's underneath here and the condition of it. So here we're looking at a few different things, mainly the suspension arm. So you can see here, this is the trailing arm for the independent suspension. Obviously you've got one and two of them on each side of the vehicle because it is a dual axle vehicle. Now a few things to note about the trailing arm is that one, you've got these little red caps. There's two on each trailing arm, so 8 in total around the van, and these are little caps that cover the grease nipples for the pivoting arms up the top here. So if you got a grease gun, just put a little bit of grease in each of these arms here, making sure that, again, just preventing that water ingress, making sure that these pivots are nice and smooth and are not going to get damaged.
If you haven't got a grease gun at home already, it's something that I would strongly recommend adding to your toolkit. They're relatively inexpensive, about $30 to $40, and I'll chuck a link in the description below as to where I bought my one from. They're a little bit fiddly and messy to use, but there's plenty of YouTube videos out there on how to use them, and they do come in handy for doing odd jobs like this.
So while we're here at the back of that trailing arm, you can see here there's a shock absorber and the spring as well. So you want to be doing a quick inspection of these. You want to make sure that spring is seated correctly on the base of this trailing arm here, and also up on top of the chassis rail up there in the bracket. There's no breaks, bends or anything that looks untoward in relation to that spring, and the bump stop is present and still working and functioning correctly as it should. Also here you got your shock absorber. Again, you're just making sure there's no obvious oil leaks. If there is a damaged shock absorber, you'll see the oil coming down, dripping down, and then the dust will collect on that and it'll be fairly obvious. Making sure that these bolts are nice and tight and still present. There's no issues with the bushes in the shock absorber, and also that these straps are still present, and whether or not they be straps around the shock like this particular one here, or chains or whatnot from the control arm to the chassis, making sure they're present so that this trailing arm doesn't overextend and everything falls out and rips apart. So in this particular instance, it's looking like it should. Okay, so continuing on with the brakes here. So here's the front drum brake of the right hand side of the van. So you can see here the electrical cable that comes out underneath. Now if you checked out my off-road caravanning video and the mods I've done here, I've done a fairly decent job of protecting this particular cable with this plastic conduit and then some K-flex around the connector, the plastic connector that connects this to the van. Now these have to remain nice and loose because obviously this particular arm is going to be moving up and down over corrugations and certain terrains, being the suspension part of the vehicle. But these are susceptible and very easily can be torn from the drums with some rocks hitting against these bits here and pulling back and ripping out this section here. So make sure all 4 of your brakes are nice and firmly connected to the brakes, making sure that they activate when you push the brake pedal on when you do a road test, and make sure there's no damage to this electrical cabling. Some manufacturers do better jobs than others than protecting these, but look, there's not much you can do. They are just going to sit here, so try and do the best you can to protect them and make sure they're all in good working order. While you're up underneath the van as well, you're going to be doing a general integrity check over the whole van as well. Everything from your water pipes, both your soft ones, your hard ones, any gas lines you might have like this one here, and all your electrical cables. So just doing my check now that I've noticed this particular cable here, which is actually the brake cable for the passenger side wheels, obviously is meant to be sitting up here like that with the cable tie around it, and that's fallen down and it's just sitting there. Well, there's no damage. If I leave it like it is, there is a chance that it's getting hit by rocks or being caught on a stick and whatnot and ripping out the entire passenger side brakes. So I'm going to go get a cable tie that up, but just go over everything you have there and make sure everything is looking like it should and there's no damage, wear and tear, cracks, all those sorts of things.
Okay, so moving on to the rear of the van, and it's going to be much of the same as we have been doing it down the front, and it's going to be a lot of that inspecting to make sure everything looks like it should and looks like it's in place. So those again who have watched my off-road modification video on this van know that I've got 4 bolts on either side holding this rear bar to the chassis rail, which has held up really well so far. So I'm going to be checking all 4 of those bolts to make sure they're still very tight and they've still got their tension there. If they start coming loose and this starts rattling around, it's going to cause me a world of problems. Also, I've got jerry can holders on the rear bar here, so I'm going to be making sure that all these 4 bolts that hold these 2 jerry can holders down, one on each side, again, nice and tight. One thing as well, don't forget about your spare, okay? You still need to make sure your spare's got plenty of tread, in good condition, is not too old, and again, that it's got correct tyre pressure, enough tread, and that it's firmly secured to the back of your bar here. If that spare tyre there rattles loose and comes off, you're never going to know while you're driving until you rock up in at camp, or even when you need to replace that wheel next time you have a flat or some damage, and it's not going to be there. Now I've also got a diesel tank mounted to the back of my spare wheel, so I'm going to make sure the mounting brackets are still in good condition. There's no cracks or damage to that tank, and all the connections where the diesel hoses are connected are all nice and tight, and there's no leaks, as well as also making sure I replace that diesel with some nice fresh stuff for when I need to use that diesel heater. It's going to work nice and well the first time. So one of the more obvious checks you're going to be doing is checking the electrics, in particular the lights. You're not going to be able to see the lights from the driver's seat of the car, so you either need someone else to come and help you or use a camera like I've done here. While checking the lights, you want to make sure all the lights work in all the different functions. So that means using the brakes and indicators while your parker lights are on and also while they're off. Making sure the hazard lights work along with all the clearance lights as well. So far we've talked a lot about the underneath of the van, the workings, the safety aspects and the drivability of the van itself. The next thing I'm going to do is have a look at the general condition and the general structure of your van. So this includes everything from bike racks we've got mounted up there, window seals, these plastic covers need to make sure they're latched in place, there's no damage cracks on them, your gas ventilation ports, your pop-top latches, the pop-top seals, all your water hatches, your water filters, your hot water system and whatnot, all on the exterior of your van. So let's do a quick walk around and I'll show you what I check. So firstly, like I said, I check the bike rack just to make sure that it's nice and secure. It still folds down like it should, making sure that all the mounting ports inside the wall are nice and tight and it's nice and rigid to the van, which it is. Making sure that it clips up into place nicely and holds in those clips, so there's no reason it's going to come out on the road. So moving down to the side of the van, the first things I'm going to check around the whole van are these 4 latches. Now these are latches for your pop-top mechanism. When you pull down, they should release. There should not be a whole lot of corrosion or rust inside these metal brackets here, and this should still be a nice firm U-shape and it shouldn't be flattened out or bent in any way. Making sure that when you pull that, it's nice and firm but not too tight and not too loose. So that can be easily adjusted just by spinning this around to tighten up or loosen that bracket. So make sure you find a nice medium there, making sure they all clip in nicely and hold nice and tight. Moving down to the windows. Now on these particular fiberglass type walls, it's very easy to see where there's going to be any leaks in the windows, but you just want to make sure that all the seals along the window are nice and secure. You're not going to be getting any water leaks in there, and the general condition of the window themselves are in good working order. So having a look at the vents here, these particular vents are now on are the fridge vents, so you got your lower and your upper, making sure that the clips are nice and secure. So in here you just got 2 clips, they come out like such when you want to pull these out, and then this vent will come out. When you want to put it back again, it's just a matter of putting it back in and pushing to the outside just like that. So making sure all those clips are nice and tight and that vent isn't going to go anywhere, and again the same for the top one. Making sure there's no obstructions and also nothing inside of these small ventilation ports. So things like spiders and whatnot can develop little nests inside these little ventilation ports. So you want to make sure if you can see in them, making sure there's nothing blocking them. Going to cause dramas when you go to use your appliances for the first time. So moving on to the water filler area, so you want to make sure that lock is still working correctly, and that everything in here it looks like it should. So obviously you've got all your covers here that aren't all broken away, they're still in good condition and they're still doing the job at sealing up those intake pipes. Moving down, just again I'm going to be checking those ventilation ports, make sure they're free of damage and they're still going to allow your van to vent. And then you're going to be looking at your hatches and making sure they all seal up correctly, along with your antenna points and electrical intakes. Just again, make sure the condition of them is in good working order. Okay, so moving down the driver's side of the van, again, you're just doing a lot more checking, making sure everything's working as it should. So obviously your door, making sure your door latch works correctly, making sure your doors split apart and locked into place securely. Nothing untoward there. Again, checking the windows, the lights, the condition of the table here, making sure it locks into place firmly, making sure it's not going to come out while you're driving along. You got a few more ports down here, again just checking the condition of these caps, making sure there's no damage, and just the condition of your awning, making sure that all the locking tabs are still locking into position and all your grub screws are nice and tight and secure. Okay guys, so there we have a lot of the things that I check both on the exterior of the van and underneath the van in terms of safety and to make sure everything's working as it should. So now it's time to get inside the van and start checking the safety features in there, some of the electrical systems, the appliances, the fire systems and whatnot. So let's get this pop top pushed up and we'll get inside the van. Okay guys, so there we have it. The roof is now up and we can move around the van a little bit easier. So what we're essentially doing here is setting up the van in the driveway, sort of like using everything we are going to be using out bush. And look, for us, we're going away next weekend, so we want to make sure everything's working because we are going free camping. So doing this, we're just going to check all the systems and figure out whether there's any problems with anything here now on the driveway where we can fix them. We've got a little bit of time before our next trip. There's nothing worse than getting out bush camping and then realise that your water pump doesn't work and you have no access to water, or your heater doesn't work, or something like that. So we're going to do this in two categories here. We're going to do a safety walkthrough as well, things that you really should be checking every few trips, and then we're also going to do a check of all the appliances to make sure they're all working correctly on both 240 gas or 12 volt depending on the appliance. So let's get first into the safety items you have to check. First safety item we need to be checking in the van is the fire extinguisher. So in the Jaycos, they normally put them down near the door so you can access them from inside or outside the van. So down here is our fire extinguisher. And all we're going to be doing down here is just making sure, again, it's in good order, but also that it is in the green zone. It's not overcharged and it's not undercharged. If at all you use one of these, they do need replacing just to make sure you have a full one. Look, if you do have a fire, this is not really going to do a whole lot, but it's going to be better than nothing. So you really want to make sure this is fully filled up and at its capacity. Making sure the bracket's in good condition. And if you need to get to it pulls out nice and easily. So there we can see that the needle there is right in the green, and we are looking good. So chuck that back in and move on to the next one. So the next safety item you want to be checking on your van is your smoke alarm. So on our van, it's located here at the rear of the van, and it's just up here. So again, you're just checking for its general overall condition. I have had a previous smoke alarm actually fall off the roof and crack all the brackets, therefore making it inoperable. So make sure it is nice and secure there. And then again, you've got a button here to press and hold to test. There we go. So 2 buzzers there, and that is working correctly as it should. So we know that if anything is going to happen, that's going to activate. Okay, so the next thing we're going to be looking at now is the electrical system in the van. So this is a bit between appliances and the safety, but we're going to be looking at the J control system here to see the status of the battery, to make sure we're both bringing in solar, make sure the battery is fully charged and charging correctly, making sure when we use appliances like we've got the lights on at the moment that it's discharging correctly and the solar's topping that back up. Then we're also going to be plugging in the 240 volt as well, making sure the system recognizes it and making sure the system adapts to it, charging correctly as it should. We're then also going to move underneath the rear bunk bed where the battery's stored. We're going to do a visual inspection of the battery itself, and that will depend on what kind of battery you have, but we'll go over that when we get down there, and also the condition of all the wiring and the connections down there as well. Okay, so here on our J control system here, we can see that we're running at 13.7 volts, and that's discharging and charging, switching between the two modes as we do have a relatively full battery here. Now we are drawing a couple of amps with the lights on at the moment, and we can see that that's drawing out correctly from the amps there. Once that volts drops down to a certain point, we should see the solar increase just a little bit, and that will indicate the solar is working correctly. And there we go, it briefly there popped into 4.6, which means I know my solar panel is working and it is bringing in a little bit of power. We can also see that the tank readings are correct, and obviously the charge state up here is showing charging now that we've got a bit of solar in, and the battery is full. Okay, so going with the electrical system there, we're also going to be wanting to check the battery and the area where the battery is mounted. Not only the fact that the mounts are still in place and holding the battery down securely, obviously being a heavy object in the van. We're also going to be checking all the wiring, the J control panel, J35 system, that we've got running here, and make sure everything looks like it should. There's no indication of excessive heat, and the battery is in a good condition as well. So looking for corrosion on the positive and negative terminals, as well as any puffing in the battery, which really shouldn't be an issue in an AGM battery. But again, that will depend on what sort of battery you're running as well, whether it be lithium, AGM, gel, calcium, whatever you choose to run. And you can do a little bit of research about what your battery should be looking like, feeling like, and some of the wear and tear signs for each of those types. So let's take off this battery cover and do a bit of a close inspection and make sure we're all running well down here. Okay, so now we've done a physical check of the battery and on the wiring, and everything appears to be in order and working correctly on the 12 volt and the solar. We're going to stick that 240 volt input in to make sure the J control system recognizes it and then adapts correctly to make sure it can manage the power from mains. So let's get the wiring out, chuck it in, see what this does. So we can see there now the J control system is showing that the AC is connected, our volts have gone up, and now the battery management system is going to regulate that 240 volt to ensure this van stays at these optimal battery levels. So now that we've checked all the safety features inside the van as well as the electrical system both on 12 volt with solar input and on 240 volt, and that is working correctly, you're going to want to go around the van and check all of your appliances. So this is everything from your water pipes and all your taps, so your bathroom taps, your toilet, your sink tap, and also your front drawbar tap as well. You're going to be wanting to check your hot water system, your gas stove, your fridge, making sure that all three functions, if you've got a three-way fridge on 240, 12 volt when connected to a car, and gas systems work correctly, your air conditioning, your microwave, your grill, and any other units you've got fitted. Just like I have a diesel heater in the van, so I want to make sure that is working correctly as well. Now look, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about each of the appliances and how to use them, because I do have a dedicated video that I'll chuck a link to, which is how to use your Jayco journey, and that will show you how to use all of the appliances. I'll go through that and give you a couple of quick tips in relation to the first time you use them after coming out of post storage. Okay, so the first tip I'm going to go over is your gas stove. Okay, now with the gas lines, if they haven't been used in a while, it's going to take some time for that gas to get through the line. So make sure you've gone out, turn your gas bottles on, selected the right bottle, and then also open up the check valve, and then come to your stove here. So you want to just grab any of your gas stoves. So we'll start with this bottom one down here on the front left, and we'll just turn it on, and then hold the button down. Now as you see, it won't start immediately, and you will have to wait some time before it does start up. There we go, so it's starting to come through now. You see there, now we have gas in the line. So you saw how long that took, and that is what you come to expect when you're first starting up, coming out of post storage. Now you just go through and make sure all three start up. So there we have it. We make sure all three work and the gas is working correctly on the stove. Okay, so maintaining that gas theme, the fridge is going to be another one of those things that take a little bit to start up on that first time after coming out of storage. So the gas stove is going to bring a lot of that fresh gas from the bottles near the fridge, which is what you want. But you're going to have to go through the gas startup procedure a few times to get it going. So I'll give you an example of how long you expect it to take. Okay, so there you go. You saw how long it took. That probably took about 5 or 6 minutes to get that gas through. I actually had to go outside the van, check the gas bottles again, make sure the gas valve is open. But obviously it's only a very small amount of gas that is released from the gas port in the back of the fridge. Now in order to get all the air bubbles out and all the fresh gas through the lines, it's going to take some time, and which in that case it certainly did. But the gas is going now. We're going to leave that on for just a little while, make sure the fins cool down, and we're going to do a test again on both, we'll do it on the 240 volt as well, and also make sure that the fridge symbol here is picking up the 12 volt. Now if you want to go into detail about how to use these fridges, again, check out my How to Jayco Journey video, and that goes into detail about how to use this fridge on all of those modes. Maintaining that gas theme, we want to make sure the gas is working for the hot water system. So simple as just flicking on the switch, and then we'll wait until that red light turns off. We'll be able to hear the gas start up from inside the van, and hopefully it maintains it, and we'll just make sure that there's fresh gas in those lines as well, and that system's operating as it should. Now the reason I'm doing so much testing in relation to gas today, just because the trip we're planning on doing next week is going to be free camping. I want to make sure all of my features work when we're free camping. So I'm not sure if you can hear in the background there, but this light is obviously turned off now and the gas has started up on the hot water system. So I can hear that going in the background. Now we're just going to give it a few moments to make sure that it continues and doesn't just go out again. And then we're going to shut the system off. Now I'm not going to get the system completely warm because I want to go out there and check the anode rod, and you don't want to do that with hot water. Okay, so it's been a minute or so and that gas hot water system is still running, and obviously that light has stayed off, which means it's operating as it should. So we're happy with that's working. Now we're going to go out and do the last check on that hot water system physically on the outside. I'm going to check the anode rod. We're probably going to have to replace it and do a tank clean as well. So we'll go out there and get that done. So for my van, it was time to do a anode change on the hot water system. I knew this was due, as before I put the van into storage, the anode rod was very low, but being in storage, there isn't much water passing through. I knew it would be safe for the waiting time. So to change this anode rod, you need to release the pressure using the pressure release valve on the top of the unit there, and then undo the big anode rod bolt at the bottom of the system. When we compare that to the new anode rod, you can see the difference there, and it really has done its job in being that sacrificial rod that is used to absorb all the chemicals and minerals in the water. When that rod is out, you want to take some effort to clean the tank out and get all the bits and pieces of the old anode rod out of the tank, so it's not being flushed through your water pump and through your system. I'm using this particular little tool here I've just bought online to help do that for me, and it really is very useful in trying to pull all of that dirt and gunk out of that hot water system. Reinstalling the new anode rod is quite straightforward, just using a bit of thread tape on the thread there and bolting it straight into the existing location. Making sure you use either the 12 volt pump or the mains pressure to fill that 20 litre tank back up, and you are good to go. Quick tip though, make sure the system is not hot before you start the change. If it is hot and there's still a bit of pressure in there, when you undo that bolt for the anode rod, it will explode and you're likely going to get burnt from the hot water coming out of the system. So there we go, guys, that brings us to an end, and I hope you enjoyed the video today in relation to all the things that I do check, service and maintain on our van, both for the safety and for the comfort of knowing everything's going to work on our next adventure. So I'm pretty satisfied now that when we head out taking this van next week, that everything should work as it's meant to, and it's going to be fairly safe, both for me, my family and all the other road users that I share the roads with. So guys, what I'd like to do is hear from you guys in relation to things that I may have missed, or things that you think are also important to check on these sorts of annual larger checks anyway, before heading out, maybe after the van's been in storage for a little while. So if you have any great ideas, make sure to chuck them in the comments section below so everybody else can have a look at them as well. If you have any questions, queries, or want me to explain anything further, just chuck us a message on either Instagram or Facebook at Exploring Oz, and we'll see you in the next video. Cheers guys.